Cold open. We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
And Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production.
Hello, listeners.
Hi.
This is Aaron.
And Brynn.
And we are here for our first installment of catching up on the whole Liz Night 4-episode. What would you call this type of entity from back then?
Well, I don't know, but it's like a intersecting storyline across 4 sitcoms. So, okay, so this is a little bonus ep. This is not our normal kind of format.
We don't have Barry with us.
Yeah. Barry is, very good at setting boundaries. And when he needs a break, he takes a break.
So we don't respect our own time.
Yeah, exactly.
And so here we are.
Insisted on recording something.
Yeah.
So we've decided to do this little bonus for you. And because basically I've been haunted by this kind of strange thread of episodes.
Phenomenon.
Yeah, since we discovered it in prepping for our High Society episode. So you guys may recall that for episode 59, we covered a short-lived sitcom called High Society, starring Gene Smart. So if you want more info on that and haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it.
Yeah, you're definitely going to want to either listen to that right before or right after this episode.
Yeah, so essentially, as soon as I realized that this was part of a 4-part arc about Elizabeth Taylor, the iconic movie star, losing a strand of black pearls, and everyone in the sitcom, the 4 different sitcom worlds being involved in this kind of caper. I just had to learn more, and I really insisted that we cover it in some way. So
it was basically 4 shows making up CBS's primetime lineup on February 26th, 1996. So I'll explain the format of today's episode. Basically, Brynn and I each took a little bit of time to independently research just what the heck Liz Night was. And then we watched the episode together that we're going to be talking about today, which is the show that started the Liz Night arc, which is The Nanny. Yeah. Season 3, episode 20 of The Nanny. You can probably find that on a major streaming platform. Watch it. And then, we delved deeper into what this was.
Yeah.
So we just watched this Nanny episode. My first reaction was, wow, The Nanny was a good show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you already were into The Nanny back when we did one of our holiday episodes, because there was like this awesome Hanukkah themed episode that they did. I really do think that The Nanny is like one of the most underrated sitcoms of that era. Yeah. I really hope that, especially right now when Fran Drescher is having a bit of a moment, that people discover The Nanny and it takes on a new whole cult status, because it is very funny and the character is like pretty iconic.
It
is. I
have
to say. And I feel like growing up, I loved The Nanny, but everyone around me, kind of like in my orbit, like adults and other kids, everyone they thought that, I don't know, they didn't like her larger than life kind of brash personality. And so it was kind of this thing where I was like, I love the nanny. I love her. She's so funny. And my parents like wouldn't watch it with me.
Aw. Yeah. It's as soon as it started, I'm like, wow, I really like Fran Drescher. And it is very timely because, she's obviously like the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and a very outspoken advocate for labor rights and for the protests and strikes that are happening right now. But yeah, like this is such an iconic character, and like we're gonna talk about some things about Liz Knight that are like it was a cheesy marketing stunt sort of thing, and I'm probably gonna get really like grumpy about the sort of like TV network apparatus behind it.
Yeah.
But all of that aside,
it's an entertaining show.
This show pulled more witty beats out of this situation than I would have ever thought possible.
Well, in this kind of time of the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strike, one of the clips from The Nanny has been going viral on social media. And it's a scene where Fran, the character, is refusing to cross a picket line. Yeah. And she was famously one of the like producers and creators. She co-created this show with her husband at the time. And so you got to think some of these storylines would have been very heavily influenced by her beliefs and her stances. For sure. In all of that.
For sure.
So,
and for those who aren't super familiar with The Nanny, like without going too deep into it, the whole thing is, she's
a flashy girl from Flushing.
A flashy girl from Flushing, Queens. But the thing is, like, she and her mother, who's a character on the show,
and her grandmother,
and her grandmother, who's a character on the show, they're all kind of like working class, but very flashy women from Queens, and she's living in the home of this super successful like Broadway musical theater producer who is, a multi-millionaire 10 times over, living in a huge mansion.
Yeah.
And as I was watching it, I realized like this is almost like the humor, like rhythm, the pacing and rhythm of this show, which is very tight. It's like the head of a drum. Boom, boom, boom. Very much like a comedic stage play. And that sort of socioeconomic juxtaposition, it reminded me of like the polar opposite of Frasier.
Yeah.
And I know I invoke Frasier in a lot of my like nerdiest analyses of sitcoms. If Frasier was supposed to be like this high society affluent guy who's living in because he's on a radio station and he's got like the housekeeper who lives with him, or sorry, she's the caregiver / housekeeper for the father, and the father who's a former cop, and the other people working at the radio station. They're all like a little bit more like down to earth working class people. And so it's the opposite juxtaposition. So I don't know, there's something fun about that. Same time period too.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the whole premise that she sort of stumbles into this job of being a nanny, like the initial way she meets this family at the start of the series is she's selling makeup door to door, and like through, and I haven't watched the pilot in so long, but basically through kind of a misunderstanding, she's thought to be there as interviewing for a nanny job for the Sheffields. And then ultimately Maxwell Sheffield hires her, and she takes on this very important job with this family, and like really bonds with the kids and helps the kids come out of their shell, because they're going to private school and they're all kind of shy and they're around a lot of conservative people. And Fran, with her big, bold personality and her fun outfits and her, like she's like the most outgoing person in this entire cast, like really helps these kids kind of shine and get confidence and have more fun and, like grab life by the balls, basically, So it's a really cute kind of concept where she learns a lot from this family, and like really they become her family. Not to spoil anything, but her and Mr. Sheffield kind of have a will there, won't they, and then they do end up getting together. So she does join the Sheffield family in an official way, and in a like very special professional way as well. So yeah, so
can I get your impersonation?
No, you can't. I'm not doing that on the mic. No,
I know you can do it.
Mr. Sheffield.
Great.
But she has a very specific laugh. It's like
it's the thing that the character is most known for. Yeah.
She has a very nasal way of speaking, and like I love the character because Fran really does poke fun at herself. Like like a lot of the jokes are just like her making fun of herself and her kind of like nasal way of speaking, and like the fact that she like wears a lot of makeup and has big hair and she's, you know, she loves the way she presents herself to the world, but she also knows that, you know, not everyone responds to it in a positive way. So she is very like quick to kind of poke fun at herself and not take herself too seriously. She's and I love that.
One of the great iconic characters of the 90s sitcom era.
She is kind of like a Lucy, you know, like, and I don't know why she doesn't have the same iconic kind of
but she
status.
Should. She's the closest thing in the 90s to Lucy, to I Love Lucy.
Do you remember though, Aaron? We also covered another fun, weird phenomenon from this sitcom. It was the Lost Backdoor pilot.
Yeah, I do remember that. The hair salon thing.
Yes. So I don't know. It's always fun to revisit, and it really makes me feel like maybe I need to do a separate deep dive podcast just on the Nanny,
because it keeps weaving its way into our podcast without us planning that.
Without us planning it, and it is like, you know, it is a successful sitcom, so it's by no means failed or really forgotten. But it's definitely one of those sitcoms that probably should have had a bigger, you know, a bigger impact.
Yeah.
You know.
So let's talk about
this episode. Let's get into it, and let's talk about Liz Night.
Yeah.
You know, this is kind of like part one of Liz Night, like both in terms of how it aired and how we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So Liz Night. So when we talked about High Society was the conclusion of Liz Night.
Yeah.
It was the ending of the arc.
Yeah.
Of the super arc across 4 shows. And The Nanny is the beginning. And after The Nanny came a show called Can't Hurry Love, which was a very short-lived show.
It's also on our list, by the way. We will cover that one in the near future.
At some point, we'll cover that show in general.
Yeah.
Because I believe it only lasted for 19 episodes. And then the other show is Murphy Brown, which is another
hugely iconic. Definitely of those 4 shows, it's definitely the most successful of those CBS sitcoms.
Yeah.
Like, it is like a very, you know, legendary sitcom.
And it's the one that spurred a recent sort of remake type of thing where they did
a reboot. Wasn't very successful.
Wasn't very successful.
No.
It lasted 1 season, but yeah. It definitely had a big impact on the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the plot of this episode is quite simple. You know, Elizabeth Taylor is heading over to the Sheffield's house. What was the reason why she was coming over?
So it was a meeting because she's going to be she was either in talks to star in something or is starring in something. So it was like a professional meeting between her and Maxwell Sheffield.
Right.
And at the same time that she's kind of like in talks to do some sort of play or show with Maxwell, she's also about to launch her latest fragrance, which is called Black Pearls. And now anyone who wasn't around in the 90s or just was too young to remember, the Liz Taylor perfumes were huge. Like, this was a huge thing back then. Like, I would say Elizabeth Taylor was kind of like a Kardashian. Like, she was an A-list celebrity and an iconic movie star, but she also was maybe the first influencer. Like, that might be a bold statement, but she was like a lifestyle brand before lifestyle brands were a thing.
Yeah.
Because she was known to be very glamorous and to have married many times and like have like a very larger than life presence. And like she was known for just glamour and just being very extra and being very, just like living this like life of luxury and whimsy. And, she had her first fragrance was hugely successful. That was White Diamonds.
Yeah.
And like the commercials, the TV commercials back then were like very iconic. Like it was always like, she enters a room and hands this other woman her like her I don't know, I can't remember who she hands it to, but there's just this moment where she hands someone her diamond earrings and she says, "These have always brought me luck." and it's like White Diamonds by Elizabeth Taylor. So it was like, I don't know if she is responsible for the very first celebrity fragrance, but it was definitely the first that was that huge and iconic.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So any of you youngins out there who don't know what the hell we're talking about, just Google like White Diamonds, Elizabeth Taylor, and then Black Pearls was supposed to be like the next one.
So what happens in the plot is, the episode opens with a pretty funny set piece where Fran Fine catches wind of the fact that Elizabeth Taylor is going to be coming.
But we have to talk
house.
about how this happens, right? Because basically she has the sense that someone very famous is coming by the house, and it's a whole thing that like Maxwell and his butler, the butler Niles, who's just kind of grumpy and kind of like smarmy, and Cece Babcock, who is his business partner, who's Maxwell's business partner. They're always trying to keep Fran away from these high profile people because they just think that she's going to give off the wrong impression because she's so,
They think she's going to embarrass them.
Yes, exactly. So they're always...
And she probably will.
So, they're always just trying to keep her away and keep her in the dark. But she's a very clever lady. And basically, she's trying to get it out of them. Like, who's coming over? And then Cece tries to, like, divert her by saying, "Can you drop this like package off for who was it? Oh, Antonio Banderas." And then she's like, "Nice try." She's like, "He already told me who's coming over." And then she's like, "Oh, so Liz Taylor is coming over."
No, she says to Maxwell, "I can't believe you told her about Elizabeth Taylor." And then he's like, "I didn't. You just did."
Yeah, so basically Fran is smarter than all of them and like tricks them into like revealing
but also that's like the thing is that she's kind of the scrappy street smart character who's more clever than they never give
her enough credit. They really don't. They always like what's the word? They always underestimate her and they don't take her seriously. And it's like she's always ends up in the end showing them that she's smarter than everyone.
So now that she knows that it's Elizabeth Taylor, she strategically figures out a way to like trap is it Miles or Niles? Niles. Yeah. She figures out a way to trap Niles in the kitchen so that he can't answer the door.
She wants to be the one to answer the door and
welcome Elizabeth Taylor in. And it's the kind of gag where in any other show, she would like orchestrate all these clever tactics to try to win. Yeah. But ultimately, like the tactics would fail. But in this case, she absolutely succeeds. Her scheme immediately pays off. Yeah. She successfully traps him in the kitchen almost like effortlessly, like she's thought of everything. And then the doorbell rings, she answers the door, and there it's Elizabeth Taylor. Like she pulls it off.
Yeah. And Elizabeth Taylor, like, to her credit, like one of the most famous people in the world at the time, actually does appear in this sitcom and has like a whole scene. And it's so funny because Fran is like so in awe, and everyone around who interacts with her is in awe and becomes a stammering idiot basically as soon as, because she is literally one of the most famous people in the world at the time. And Fran especially would worship her because she looks at Liz as like the ultimate glamour icon. And then when she goes to hang up Liz's like wrap that she brings with her, she like finds her mother Sylvia, who she obviously blabbed to that Liz Taylor's coming by, hiding in the closet, which is hilarious.
Like a stowaway.
Yeah, because
she would have been hiding in there for hours, probably.
yeah, because Sylvia is basically Fran, an older version of Fran. They have a very similar personality, like lacking the kind of, anything close to the waspy sort of conventional way of interacting with people. They're like both larger than life and
unfiltered.
And Sylvia has a full-on sparkly cocktail dress on because she wants to impress Liz, because she wants, Liz is like, you have to realize that Elizabeth Taylor at this time was around for decades. And so basically, not only would Fran have grown up watching her movies, but so would Sylvia. Like, Sylvia would have definitely, seen many of her movies when she was young. And, so it's just this cute thing where they're both just so in awe and they're trying to impress her. And they're treating her like she's literally royalty. Like, they're like kind of bowing to her in an awkward way.
And there was a gag right before answering the door. Like, the doorbell rings. Niles is trapped in the kitchen. And then Fran takes a camera, places it on a table, and starts the self-timer on it.
Yeah.
And then answers the door. And then when Elizabeth Taylor comes in, she says, like, I just want you to look over at that table for a moment.
That pretty table,
and she's like, what are you talking about? And waiting for the camera to go off to take a picture of the two of them.
Yeah.
Which was a pretty funny gag. Like, it's very fast-paced. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
And then the grandmother is also hiding.
Yes. So then it's revealed that the grandmother, Grandma Yetta, is also stowed away in the closet. So they all basically, like, all these women were like just clamoring to meet Elizabeth Taylor, wanted their moment with her, wanted to kind of bask in her glamour.
Yeah.
And
now, all of this is like prologue to the actual plot, because what happens is eventually Maxwell comes in. He kind of wrestles them off of Elizabeth Taylor and tries to like initiate whatever meeting that he's supposed to be having with her, and wants to go fetch some tea, and they're gonna have a meeting. But Elizabeth Taylor asks Fran to help her with a little favor because she has this string of black pearls that are there for promoting her fragrance. And the way that she describes it, I mean, it's such obvious like infomercial level product placement. She's like, these are my black pearls that I'm going to be wearing for a photo shoot to promote my brand new fragrance called Black Pearls. And it's a whole thing. But then Fran takes it, happy to help. Her mother suggests like that she can't trust a bonded courier and that she should deliver the pearls herself.
Yeah, and Fran agrees, and frankly, if I were in that situation, I feel like I might have made the same leap. Like, I might have done that myself because I'd be so paranoid. But the real moment when the sitcom logic kind of comes into play is like, why the hell did Liz Taylor send her jewelry off? Why didn't she? It was in a small box. She could have just kept it with her until her photo shoot. Like, what was the reason for
it was
sending it ahead of time?
Very contrived.
It was very, very contrived, but I feel like I didn't care because I was so entertained.
Yeah. It's a contrivance because the whole point is the pearls get lost, and then the arc over the 4 episodes is searching,
trying to find these. And every
pearls.
Sitcom gets involved in either the search or the fun, it's a very clever kind of thing that's woven throughout. So basically, Fran, in her attempt to take the pearls herself, takes a cab. And the cab driver is a very eccentric cab driver named Cosette, who's played by Rosie O'Donnell. If you've listened to our High Society episode, you'll remember this. And we were kind of debating about,
whether she had her own show and whether that was a character, a regular.
And like, she did have a show, but it was her very popular talk show, her daytime talk show at the time. But she was an established actor also. Like, Rosie O'Donnell was a huge like movie star back then, and then she took her like daytime talk show, and then kind of like later on was on The View. Like, she's had such an interesting career.
So this was more like an amusing cameo.
Exactly. This was like a fun little cameo that she made in this episode of The Nanny, because it was the audience gave a big reaction when the scene
to
opens.
Her appearance. Big reaction. So we know she's in this, and we know she makes an appearance in High Society when the plot wraps up. We don't know if she appears in Can't Hurry Lover Murphy Brown. But possibly.
I guess we'll find out when we hunt down those other episodes.
Like maybe she has a cameo that weaves through all 4 shows. We don't know yet. We don't know yet. But anyway, so the grandmother's a stowaway in the closet. Apparently that was her idea originally.
Yeah.
So okay.
No, but we're getting off topic. I was trying to explain how the pearls got lost.
Okay.
So she's in the cab with Rosie O'Donnell, and basically Rosie O'Donnell's character is driving very erratically, and they're kind of they're bickering a little bit, they're joking. It's a little bit of a chaotic interaction. And at one point, she's like not stopping at a red, and Fran's like, stop at the red. And then she slams on the brakes, causing Fran to like lurch forward and smack her head on the divider between the front seat where the cab driver sits and where the passenger
the glass
sits.
Divider.
Yeah, this is the glass divider. She smacks her head, and then it's like a hard cut to the hospital.
Yeah.
And so she's at the hospital, and we have no idea what's happened to those pearls. So basically, she's left the pearls in the cab, is what we assume.
Yeah.
Based on what's going on, because she just passes, she gets knocked out and then has to go to the hospital.
But she wakes up in the hospital, and she has no other injuries other than the fact that she, in a classical comedic trope,
gets
has
temporary amnesia. Yeah.
And I have to say, normally I hate tropes like this, and the amnesia thing, it just feels so cheap. This was the funniest version of that I've ever seen.
Because here's how they deal with it. Basically, all these things that they're trying to explain to her about her life, they make no sense because the show itself has a lot of contrived elements, and it's her kind of poking fun at all of that while she's
a little bit more context that we need to explain is that the doctor says, look, her memory will come back on its own soon, but you shouldn't try to force it or tell her
too much.
Her too much. Let her come around to it herself. Don't start trying to explain who she is or who people are.
Okay, so
it'll shock
I kind of misspoke there,
So the whole thing is that she's back in the house with the Sheffield family, and none of them can correct any of her random assumptions.
Yeah, so she's assuming that she's married to Maxwell and that the
3 kids are her kids.
She,
at one point, she thinks maybe she's Elizabeth Taylor. Her mind is just jumping
all over
these random conclusions, and under the doctor's orders, none of them are allowed to correct her.
Yeah. And so there's a scene where Maxwell he's all stressed out because he just wants to know where the fuck these pearls are. So he's really stressed out, but he can't really try to get it out of Nanny Fine. He just has to patiently wait for her to heal and for her memory to come back. So he's really, really stressed out. So he decides to have this this bubble bath and listen to music, and he's kind of zoned out and disassociating in the bath when Fran sneaks in because she's kind of at this point assuming they're married, and she's feeling kind of sexy and wants to get in the tub with her.
Takes off her clothes, gets
husband.
in the tub with him.
Yeah. And there's already throughout the series, there's kind of already some tension, some romantic tension, some sexual tension between them. So this is the obvious kind of joke to make, because she's she's just following when she's in the state of having amnesia, she's just following her instincts, and her instincts are, I'm attracted to this guy, and he's I live with him.
So
he's my husband. We're married.
Logically, they must be married.
I'm gonna get into this tub with him and get something started or whatever.
And there's the thing about how the grandmother.
Grandmother also doesn't do any favors, because she basically implies that they're married in
Because when she says that he's the husband, and then she has these 3 kids, and the grandmother's like, listen, I gotta level with you. The truth is, the 2 oldest kids are actually from a previous marriage.
Yeah, but the the funny part about this is Aaron was like, your reaction was, oh, she's just messing with her. I'm like, no. Part of the joke of the series is that this grandmother is like a little bit loopy and like, heading towards.
Yeah, so she also doesn't know.
So she doesn't really know. So it's either she's messing with her or she like honestly can't remember what the relationship is.
Yeah.
Herself. So anyway, but then also grandmother and mother really kind of push for there to be something between Fran and Maxwell, because clearly they would love for her to marry a guy like a successful guy like this.
He's both handsome and rich.
Yeah, and British, so,
And British and produces musical theater, which is something that they all love.
Yeah, so it's like a whole thing where, now I really want to rewatch the episodes when they actually get together, because, it's got to be something that the mom really reacts strongly to.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
this does make me want to watch more of the Nanny.
Yeah. So basically, the tub mishap happens, and it's a whole series of mishaps where she's making assumptions about her life, but they're completely wrong.
She even thinks that her nasal voice and funny laugh is the result of hitting her head.
And she's like makes fun of that because she's like, oh, can you imagine going through life sounding like this?
Yeah.
And that's like literally her normal.
So it's some really good self-deprecating humor.
Yeah.
At one point, like when she gets into the bath and he realizes he has to confess that they're not married. And so then she thinks like, then what am I doing here? And he's like, well, I pay you. So then she immediately thinks that maybe she's like a sex worker or something like that.
Yeah. She's like, oh, and
then she's like, that explains my shoes.
Yeah.
And then he's like, no, you're the nanny to take care of my kids. And
she's kind of like, that doesn't make any sense. She's like, I've got style, I've got flair. How did I become the nanny? And that is like the catchphrase of the show from the theme song.
From the theme song and the whole premise of the show.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Now I'm gonna get a little bit like now I'm gonna give the counterpoint of why I'm annoyed by the Liz Knight concept.
Okay, go for it.
But again, this was a very enjoyable episode to watch.
Yes.
When we did some further research, it turns out it was a very blatant marketing stunt. It was pushed on all of these sitcoms by the network.
Yeah.
It sounds like perhaps the writers and actors of these shows were not all stoked to do this. This was something that CBS made them all fall into line on, but you can see how, like, on The Nanny, they actually, like, ran with it.
It makes the most sense. The placement of it on The Nanny makes the most sense, in my opinion.
It's funny.
And High Society, like, there is some... I feel like you can justify this kind of appearance on both of those shows, given the themes, the larger
characters,
than life, like,
and it sounds like
eccentric characters.
It sounds like maybe the show where this was least welcome was Murphy Brown, which is a show where like this would be tonally like not a great fit, and it also sounds like they found a way to give it the minimum amount of like allowable screen time in their episode. So at some point we'll get to watching that, but So, but that said, I mean, they ran with it in a clever way. They made it funny. I mean, as a jumping off point to this amnesia plot, it was funny, even though it is contrived.
Yeah.
It turns out that it's unknown who paid whom in this relationship between Elizabeth Taylor and her company and CBS, or perhaps it sounds like from another source, maybe no money was exchanged and it was assumed to be like a mutually beneficial cross promotion, like a way to get people committed to watching all 4 shows back to back.
Yeah.
On the TV side, and for Elizabeth Taylor, free promotion for this new product.
So we should say we're being vague about sources just because, like, they're covered by entertainment writers and critics for the major newspapers. I mean, we can maybe say the newspapers.
No, we don't have to say. It's just, we read multiple sources.
The reason we don't want to source them is because they're they're very, very icky. The way they talk about Elizabeth Taylor as a figure, as a woman over, 50, and the way they talk about basically things that are sort of interest to women in general. Like, it's very gross. And, you're all welcome to do a Google on this and kind of read for yourself. But like all of the major like publications did like a little, like in their entertainment section, did a story about this where there's a lot of talk about Elizabeth Taylor's appearance. And it's just like, it's sad. Like, it's like very like, so it's like
critiquing the marketing stunt.
The marketing stunt and saying just like really mean-spirited things about Elizabeth Taylor.
But what I was going to say is critiquing the marketing stunt as to whether or not product placement should have this much influence on 4 different TV shows might be fair game. But they go into territory in these articles that go way outside of bounds of what would be necessary to critique the marketing stunt. And they're like written in a very smarmy, harsh way.
It's very harsh. I will say, everyone, you could check out this blog. This is like a more like recent blog. It's basically Pubala.com, Tom Holbrook's crossovers and spin-offs pages. And this is where this blogger has covered this entire 4-part crossover. I think, talks about it. Yeah, so he just does a good job explaining kind of the 4-episode arc if anyone's interested, just to get the background on that. But as far as the mainstream publications, I would just say just Google it yourself and you'll get a really good sense. Like, this is something we've noticed in working on this podcast, is that like just the way TV writers back then like wrote about women on screen, it gets pretty ugly. Like, it's just pretty like mean-spirited, and it's like obviously like entrenched in
I
misogyny.
I went into researching this already thinking like that So
if anyone's gonna, give us flack for not citing our sources, there's a very specific reason why in this case.
Like, I don't like crossovers. I don't like these sorts of stunts that break the fourth wall. We've talked about this before. Like, I went into researching this show thinking like, I don't like this type of stunt. But when I read a few of the articles of critics at the time talking about it, I was like, why are you being so mean about it? Like, it's so, I don't know. And they go into all sorts. Well, I'm just going to say like one of them, a prominent critic at the time, seemed to hate all 4 shows. Like, even putting aside...
Even Murphy Brown, which was very...
Even putting aside the critique of the marketing stunt, they went into the article basically describing all 4 of these shows as, I'm paraphrasing here, like total drivel. And I'm like, okay, 2 of these shows had just started and they were pretty new shows. So no one knew that much about High Society or Can't Hurry Love yet. But like The Nanny and Murphy Brown were already very successful, very good, like solid shows.
Yeah.
And the whole tone just really came across as misogynistic because, I mean, what's the common factor in those 2 shows is that they have female protagonists.
Strong female protagonists.
Very strong-minded female protagonists. So, which presumably was part of the reason why they felt like a cross promotion with Elizabeth Taylor would make any sort of sense in the first place.
Totally. And you know what? Like, it's so funny that back then, like the overriding like sentiment was like, oh, these networks have lost all their integrity doing a thing like this. And it's like, now there's so much product placement.
Integral what now?
Yeah. And now the entire, like, basically what we've seen in this 4-parter thing is like, a brand partnership akin to like what you see on like Instagram now with basically influencers and reality TV stars. They're all just like shamelessly plugging like products, and no one critiques that, because at this point we all have to kind of sell out a little and do these things,
it's so
right?
Quaint.
So it's, it's so quaint that back then they were like railing against this like this integrity. And it's like, I think what they did with that show was actually very clever and entertaining. Those shows are very clever and entertaining. So it's like, I don't really mind that they're kind of shilling a fragrance. And I kind of like think that was cool of Liz Taylor and her camp to like come up with something fun like that, something kind of out of the box.
I don't mind.
I don't mind. It's just a fragrance, people. It's not like they're trying to push like junk food on children or like, something dangerous.
I mean,
it's just a fragrance.
I don't mind that.
And it was part of the zeitgeist. The whole like the whole like Liz Taylor fragrance things were definitely part of pop culture. Yeah. So why not?
I don't mind the shilling the fragrance part. You know me, I always complain about crossovers of any kind. To me, it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a marketing stunt.
And I'm fine with them.
Just the idea of like breaking the fourth wall on the different story worlds and having crossovers. I always get grumpy about that. But like, to read the way that critics were reacting to it at the time,
it's so surreal.
You would think that it was like some big political scandal or something like, but it's so quaint to be upset about something like this as a marketing stunt. And it's like, meanwhile, only a few years later, the internet's like, hold my beer.
Yeah, exactly.
1996, what an innocent time.
What an innocent
to
time,
think that this is a marketing stunt.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's like, so what if it is? I thought it was very clever. I thought, it's like, it's just so silly. The whole thing is so silly. And like, the thing that I was also reading up on is like how CBS at the time had this like nickname of being the Tiffany Network. So it had a bit of a cachet of being like classier and like more high end, which is kind of a random sort of thing to associate with it. And, people thought that this, of all things, kind of cheapened that reputation. And I'm thinking, like, how does it cheapen?
It's because her fragrances were sold exclusively at Kmart or something like that.
So, God forbid, someone who is very glamorous is actually selling things to people.
That's accessible.
Exactly. So she's created an accessible product for, people who are like middle and working class that they can buy and they can feel glamorous like her, God forbid. Yeah. It's like,
which makes a lot of sense to put into the Nanny.
It does. The whole thing makes so much sense. I thought it was a very clever move. And, I just think it's so funny how the critics were on this like high horse of, just railing against it so hard.
I know. It's weird. It's certainly, if nothing else, a time capsule.
It is. It's a real time capsule.
Because something like this would never happen today for a whole number of reasons.
Yeah.
The idea of the network ratings being dominated by sitcoms.
Yeah.
The idea of sitcoms being super mainstream. The idea of having a primetime lineup that's 4 sitcoms back to back.
Yeah.
The idea of those sitcoms being written episode by episode so that you could actually coordinate something like this. And then the idea of a marketing stunt being novel. Like, none of these things could happen again. So it's like traveling back in time to a very specific point in history.
Yeah.
Like that part of the sort of mid to late 90s when things like this could happen.
I have to say, like, as much as people didn't like this whole quote unquote stunt, the plot and everything about it were way more innocent than some of the other things that were on television at the time. Like, we talked about how, we enjoyed watching The Naked Truth because it was like basically a showcase of the worst parts of that era.
Yeah.
And, it's just so interesting because everyone was so quick to criticize the intention of producing these episodes and these, like, this partnership, this collaboration with this big celebrity. They're so quick to criticize it, but yet, like, it was maybe ultimately the least harmful, like, type of plots to like discuss. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, maybe we should get to just kind of how this phase of Liz Knight ends.
Yeah. So, do you want to explain?
Yeah. So ultimately, there's lots of jokes that ensue, as we've said, where Fran is like making these funny assumptions about her life. And then finally her mom, Sylvia, shows up and she's sort of trying to like jog her memory and trying to show Fran some photos of, I guess, her father to try to like jog her memory.
Yeah, like, do you recognize this guy?
And the joke is that like he's wearing a different hairpiece every time. So she doesn't recognize him.
I don't know who any of these men are. They're all your father wearing different hairpieces.
And then at one point, she just kind of mentions that one of Fran's cousins has gotten engaged, and that's basically what snaps Fran out of her
jealousy.
Her jealousy that her cousin's getting married before her snaps her out of it. And then, so that's kind of like the end of the episode.
And then she remembers that she left the pearls in the cab.
And then Maxwell conveniently kind of walks in and is like, upset with her. He's like, okay, finally I can be mad at you.
And then freaks out and chases her up the stairs.
Yeah, which is kind of a weird thing to add in there. But anyway, so basically it's setting it up for the next phase of Liz Knight. So now they know that these pearls were left in the cab, and so I guess we'll have to find out on our next installment what happens from there. Like, where we have to track the pearls,
and we have no idea when we're going to do the next installment.
We have no idea. It could be literally any time because we're kind of just threading it in when we feel like it. It could be a month
or a year. We have no idea. So
you guys will have to keep tuning in until we continue this fabulous Liz Knight.
And there you have it. So, until next time.
Cut to credits.
That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Byrne, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeger. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.